Sometimes life strips away everything you thought you knew about yourself. Sometimes it takes you to places so dark and desperate that you discover strength you never knew existed. Anna Morrison finds herself chained in a wagon, being delivered, like cargo, to a mountain man named Silas McGraw in the frozen wilderness of 1847 Montana. Her husband's gambling debts have made her property, and now she faces a brutal choice from the man they call Grizzly. He gives her a simple ultimatum: marry him and bear his children, or face the winter cold alone. The mountain is unforgiving, and so is the man who rules it. But Anna has her own secrets, and Grizzly has his own pain. In this harsh land where survival means everything, two wounded people must find a way to live together. Can love grow in such a cruel place? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The iron shackles around Anna. Morrison's wrists had rubbed her skin raw during the 3-day journey up the mountain. Every jolt of the wagon wheels over rocky terrain sent fresh waves of pain through her shoulders, but she had stopped crying on the second day. Tears were a luxury she could no longer afford. Her life had been so different just 6 months ago. Anna had been the wife of Thomas Morrison, a respectable merchant in Denver. They lived in a 2-story house with real glass windows and a piano in the parlor. She wore silk dresses to church on Sundays and hosted tea parties for the other merchants' wives. The tarnished wedding ring still on her finger, now the only reminder of that life, had once caught the light beautifully when she poured tea from her grandmother's china set, but Thomas had secrets darker than the mountain shadows now surrounding her. While Anna tended their small garden and planned dinner parties, her husband spent his evenings in the gambling halls. What started as friendly card games became an obsession that consumed every dollar they owned, then every dollar they could borrow, and finally every dollar they would ever hope to earn. When Thomas died of a weak heart during a particularly devastating poker loss, Anna discovered the true horror of her situation. The debts weren't just large, they were insurmountable. Men with hard faces and harder voices came to her door, demanding payments that would take several lifetimes to satisfy. They took the house, the furniture, even her grandmother's china, but that still wasn't enough. A man's debts passed to his widow, they told her with cold satisfaction. Lucky for you, we know someone who might take you in trade. The journey to Silas McGraw's mountain had been a nightmare of cold nights and meager meals. The two men who transported her, Jake Hewitt and Cyrus Black, treated her like livestock being delivered to market. They spoke around her as if she couldn't hear, discussing her like she was a prize cow being led to auction. Grizzly McGraw pays his debts, Jake had said, spitting tobacco juice into the campfire. Been alone up on that mountain for nigh on 8 years now. Reckon he's ready for some company. Company? Cyrus laughed, a sound like grinding stones. That ain't what he wants her for. Man needs sons to carry on his name. Heard tell he's getting desperate enough to take any woman long. As she's young enough to bear children, Anna had closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's voice, her father's gentle hands, the security of childhood when the world made sense, and people were fundamentally good. That world seemed like a fairy tale now. The mountain itself was both beautiful and terrible. Pine trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their branches heavy with snow that sparkled like diamonds in the weak winter sun. The air was so clean it hurt to breathe, sharp and thin at this altitude. But beneath the beauty lay danger. Wolves howled in the distance, and more than once they had seen bear tracks crossing their path. As they climbed higher, civilization fell away entirely. No roads, no telegraph lines, no church bells or train whistles. Just the creak of wagon wheels, the snort of horses, and the whisper of wind through countless trees. Anna understood why a man might choose such isolation, but she also understood how it could drive him mad. The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend in the trail, nestled in a clearing carved from the forest. It was larger than Anna had expected, built of thick logs, chinked with mud and moss, with a stone chimney releasing a thin curl of smoke into the grey sky. The roof was steep to shed snow, and a covered porch wrapped around the front. Split firewood was stacked neatly along one wall, enough to last through several winters. But what caught Anna's attention was the man standing on that porch, waiting for them. Silas Grizzly McGraw was exactly what she had feared, and somehow, more than she had imagined. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway. His dark hair hung past his collar, streaked with early grey despite his apparent youth. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but couldn't hide the sharp intelligence in his pale blue eyes. He wore buckskin pants and a wool shirt that had seen many winters, and a knife hung from his belt with the casual familiarity of a man who used it daily. Most unsettling of all, he was handsome in a wild, untamed way that made Anna's breath catch. Despite her terror, this wasn't the brutal savage she had imagined, but something far more dangerous, a man who chose to live like a savage while possessing the mind and bearing of a gentleman. Jake and Cyrus climbed down from the wagon with obvious relief. 3 days in the wilderness had tested even their rough constitutions, and they were eager to conclude their business and return to civilization. "McGraw," Jake called out, touching his hat brim in a gesture that wasn't quite respectful. "Got your delivery here. One woman as agreed." Silas descended the porch steps with the fluid grace of a predator, his pale eyes fixed on Anna, studying her with the intensity of a man evaluating livestock. She forced herself to meet his gaze, refusing to look away even when her heart hammered against her ribs. "She's smaller than I expected," Silas said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "Looks like she hasn't eaten a proper meal in weeks." "She's been fed," Cyrus protested. "We ain't starved her none. Trail rations and creek water don't put meat on a woman's bones." Silas circled the wagon slowly, examining Anna from every angle. "How old is she?" 26, according to the papers. "Still young enough for breeding, if that's what you're worried about." Anna's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she bit back the angry words that wanted to spill out. These men held her life in their hands, and defiance would only make her situation worse. "Can she work?" Silas continued his inspection. "I don't need a delicate flower up here. Mountain life is hard on soft women." Jake laughed. "Look at those hands. She's done her share of work. Merchant's wife ain't the same as some pampered rich girl." Anna looked down at her hands, chapped and calloused from the journey, but still bearing traces of her former life. Her nails, once carefully manicured for social functions, were broken and dirty. The soft skin that had once been her pride was now rough from cold and neglect. "The debt papers," Silas said, extending his hand to Jake. "I want to see them." Jake produced a folded document from his coat pocket. Silas read it carefully, his expression revealing nothing. Anna found herself wondering if he could actually read, or if he was simply studying the official-looking seals and signatures that bound her fate. "Thomas Morrison's gambling debts," Silas said finally, "passed to his widow according to territorial law. Debts totaling $800 plus interest." He looked up at Anna. "That's a considerable sum, Mrs. Morrison." Anna found her voice at last. "Those debts were my husband's, not mine. I had no knowledge of his gambling." "Doesn't matter what you knew," Cyrus interjected. "Law says a wife is responsible for her husband's obligations." "The law," Silas repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, the law has many interesting provisions when it comes to a woman's obligations." He folded the papers and tucked them into his shirt pocket. "Very well, the debt is transferred to me. Mrs. Morrison is now my responsibility. And our business." "Here is concluded," Jake said with obvious relief. He was already climbing back onto the wagon seat. "We'll be on our way before the snow gets worse." "Wait!" Anna called out, panic rising in her throat. She had known this moment would come, but the reality of it struck her like a physical blow. These men, as crude and unpleasant as they were, represented her last connection to the world she knew. Once they left, she would be alone with this stranger in the vast wilderness. Cyrus paused in the act of gathering the reins. "You got something to say, woman?" Anna looked at the mountain man, who now owned her, then at the men who had delivered her, then at the endless forest stretching in all directions. There was nowhere to run, no one to appeal to, no law, but the harsh justice of survival. "Nothing," she whispered. "I have nothing to say." The wagon pulled away, wheels crunching through the snow. Anna watched until it disappeared around the bend, taking with it her last link to civilization. The silence that followed was profound. No city sounds, no human voices, just the sigh of wind through pine boughs and the distant call of a hawk. Silas McGraw stood beside her, close enough that she could smell leather and wood smoke, and something essentially masculine that made her pulse quicken despite her fear. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than she expected. "Those shackles must be painful," he observed. "Let's get them off you." He produced a key from his pocket, the same key Jake had handed him along with the debt papers. With surprising gentleness, he unlocked the iron bands around her wrists. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Anna rubbed her chafed skin, hardly believing she was free of the weight that had burdened her for 3 days. "Thank you," she said, surprised to find genuine gratitude in her voice. Silas pocketed the shackles without comment. "Come inside, we need to talk." The interior of the cabin revealed more about its owner than Anna had expected. The main room was spacious and well-organized, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and shelves lined with books. Actual books, dozens of them. A large table occupied the center of the room, its surface scarred from years of use, but polished smooth. Thick furs covered the floor, and the walls were decorated with snowshoes, fishing nets, and other tools of wilderness survival. This was not the crude hovel she had imagined, but the home of a man who valued both comfort and function. Someone who read books and took pride in craftsmanship. Someone who had chosen this isolation rather than been driven to it by ignorance or inability to live among civilized people. "Sit," Silas said, indicating a chair near the fire. "You look ready to collapse." Anna sank into the offered chair, grateful for its solid comfort. The warmth from the fireplace seemed to penetrate her bones, reminding her how cold she had been for days. Silas moved around the room with easy familiarity, stoking the fire and putting a kettle on to boil. "I suppose you're wondering what happens now," he said without turning around. Anna watched his broad shoulders move beneath his wool shirt as he worked. "I imagine you'll tell me when you're ready." He glanced at her over his shoulder, something that might have been approval flickering in his pale eyes. "You're not what I expected either, Mrs. Morrison." "What did you expect?" Silas considered the question while he measured tea leaves into a pot. "Someone broken, I suppose. Crushed by circumstances. A woman who would weep and plead and promise anything to avoid her fate. Would that change anything?" "No," he admitted, "but it would make this conversation more difficult." He poured hot water over the tea leaves and brought the pot to the table, along with 2 chipped but clean cups. The simple ritual of serving tea in this wilderness cabin struck Anna as surreal, a ghost of the civilized life she had lost. "The men who brought you here spoke truly," Silas said as he filled her cup. "I am in need of a wife. More specifically, I'm in need of sons to carry on my name and inherit what I've built here." Anna wrapped her fingers around the warm cup, using its heat to steady herself. "And if I refuse?" Silas settled into the chair across from her, his pale eyes never leaving her face. "Then you're free to leave. I won't keep you here by force." Hope flickered in Anna's chest, quickly followed by crushing reality. "Leave and go where? I have no money, no family, no friends. Winter is coming, and I know nothing about surviving in the wilderness." "That's your choice to make," Silas said quietly. "I won't lie to you about the difficulty. This mountain can kill the unprepared in a dozen different ways, but I won't pretend you're truly trapped here either. A determined woman might make it down to the valley settlements if she was careful and lucky." Anna stared into her teacup, seeing her future reflected in its dark surface. Death by freezing or starvation in the wilderness, or life as this man's unwilling bride. Neither choice offered hope, but one at least promised survival. "What would you require of me?" she asked. "Be my wife in all ways," Silas replied without hesitation. "Share my bed, bear my children, help maintain this home. In return, I'll protect you, provide for you, and treat you with as much kindness as our arrangement allows. And if I prove barren? My first marriage produced no children." Something flickered across Silas's expression. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. "Then we'll face that possibility when it comes, but I have reason to hope that won't be the case." Anna looked around the cabin again, noting details she had missed before. A woman's touch was evident in small things: curtains at the windows, dried flowers in a vase, embroidered cushions on the chairs. Someone had lived here before her. Someone who had made this place a home rather than merely a shelter. "You were married before," she said. It wasn't a question. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes." "What happened to her?" "She died." The words were flat, final, offering no invitation for further questions. Anna sensed deep pain behind his curtness, the kind of grief that built walls around a man's heart. Perhaps she wasn't the only one whose life had been shattered by loss. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows, and promising a cold night ahead. Anna realized that regardless of her decision, she would be spending this night in Silas McGraw's cabin. The thought both terrified and, strangely, comforted. "Her. I need time to think," she said finally. Silas nodded, rising from his chair. "You can have tonight, but I'll need your answer in the morning. If you decide to leave, I'll provide you with supplies and directions to the nearest settlement. If you decide to stay—" He paused, his pale eyes meeting hers with startling intensity. "If you stay, there will be no changing your mind once spring comes. This isn't a temporary arrangement, Mrs. Morrison. I'm offering you a life, not a season, of shelter." Anna understood the weight behind his words. This wasn't a business proposition or a convenient arrangement. This man was offering her everything he had: his home, his protection, his name, in exchange for the hope of family and continuity that her womb might provide. "I understand," she said. Silas showed her to a small bedroom off the main room, obviously prepared for her arrival: a bed with clean sheets, a washstand with soap and towels, even a nightgown laid out on the coverlet. The thoughtfulness of the preparation surprised her. "Rest well, Mrs. Morrison," he said from the doorway. "Tomorrow we begin whatever comes next." As Anna heard his footsteps retreat across the main room, she sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to truly absorb her situation. She was alone on a mountain with a man she didn't know, faced with a choice that would determine the rest of her life. The wedding ring on her finger, tarnished now and loose from her recent weight loss, reminded her that she had made such a choice before and how badly it had ended. But as she prepared for sleep in this stranger's home, Anna found herself thinking not of Thomas Morrison's betrayal or the debts that had enslaved her, but of the surprising gentleness in Silas McGraw's hands when he had removed her shackles. Perhaps kindness could exist even in the harshest circumstances. Perhaps, in this place where survival was everything, she might finally discover who she truly was when everything else was stripped away. The wind howled around the cabin like a living thing, but the walls were strong and the fire warm. For the first time in months, Anna Morrison felt safe enough to sleep deeply. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but tonight she was sheltered from the storm. Dawn came grey and cold to the mountain, filtering through frost-covered windows with the pale promise of a difficult day. Anna woke to the sound of an axe splitting wood somewhere outside the cabin, each strike echoing across the clearing like a deliberate announcement of the morning's arrival. She dressed quickly in yesterday's worn traveling dress, her only remaining garment besides the nightgown Silas had provided. The wash basin held a thin layer of ice that she broke with her fingers, the cold water shocking her fully awake as she splashed it on her face. In the small mirror above the stand, she saw a stranger looking back. A woman with tangled hair and hollow cheeks, her eyes holding depths of experience that hadn't been there 6 months ago. The main room was warm and filled with the scent of coffee and frying bacon. Silas stood at the stove with his back to her, working with the easy efficiency of a man long accustomed to caring for himself. He had changed from yesterday's clothes into clean buckskins and a fresh wool shirt, his dark hair tied back with a leather cord. Around his neck hung something she hadn't noticed before, a necklace made from what appeared to be bear claws, strung on sinew and worn smooth from years of handling. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison," he said without turning around. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I expected," Anna admitted, surprised by the truth of it. "Thank you for your kindness." Silas glanced at her over his shoulder, something unreadable in his pale eyes. "Kindness is a luxury in places like this. What I showed you was practical consideration. A sick or exhausted woman serves no one's purposes." The bluntness of his words stung, but Anna recognized the deflection behind them. This man was uncomfortable with gratitude, perhaps unused to it after years of isolation. She took a seat at the table, watching as he filled 2 plates with generous portions of food. "Have you made your decision?" he asked, setting a plate before her. Anna looked down at the meal. Eggs, bacon, biscuits with honey, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. It was more food than she had seen in weeks, prepared with care and served without ceremony. Such a simple thing, yet it spoke to the quality of life this man could provide. "Before I answer," she said carefully, "I need to understand what you're truly offering." Silas sat across from her, his expression guarded. "I thought I was clear yesterday. You spoke of marriage, children, a life together. But you also spoke of this as an arrangement, a practical solution to mutual problems." Anna met his eyes directly. "Which is it, Mr. McGraw? Are you seeking a wife or purchasing a broodmare?" The question hung between them like smoke from the fire. Silas chewed his food slowly, considering his words with the deliberation of a man who had grown accustomed to solitude and found conversation a skill that required conscious effort. "Both, perhaps," he said finally. "I won't lie and claim this is a romantic courtship. You're here because circumstances forced you, and I'm considering this arrangement because I have needs that 8 years of isolation haven't fulfilled." Anna appreciated his honesty, even as it confirmed her worst fears about her situation. "And what needs are those, exactly?" Silas's hand moved unconsciously to the bear claw necklace at his throat, his fingers worrying the smooth talismans with obvious familiarity. The gesture seemed to steady him, drawing strength from whatever memories or meaning the claws held. "I came to this mountain to escape the world," he said, his voice taking on a distant quality. "I thought isolation would bring me peace. For a while it did, but a man can only run from his nature for so long. And your nature is to build something lasting, to leave a legacy that matters." His pale eyes focused on her with startling intensity. "I've built a good life here, Mrs. Morrison. This cabin will stand for generations if properly maintained. I know every game trail for 20 miles, every water source, every shelter the mountain offers. I can provide security and comfort that most frontier settlements can't match." Anna sensed deeper currents beneath his practical words. "But you can't pass any of that knowledge to yourself." "Exactly." Silas leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same careful attention he had shown the previous day. "I need sons to teach, to carry on what I've learned. And I need a woman strong enough to raise those sons in this harsh place. And if I prove unable to give you children?" The question struck something vulnerable in Silas's expression, a flicker of pain that he quickly suppressed. His fingers tightened on the bear claws, and Anna wondered what personal losses had driven him to this desperate measure. "Then we'll face that disappointment together," he said quietly. "But I have to try, Mrs. Morrison. The alternative is to Live out my remaining years alone, watching everything I've built crumble with no one to care for it after I'm gone. Anna understood the weight of such loneliness, the fear of dying forgotten and unmourned. Her own marriage had been childless, each failed pregnancy a small death that left her feeling increasingly worthless in Thomas's eyes. Perhaps that failure had driven him to seek solace in gambling halls, just as this man's losses had driven him to seek isolation in the wilderness. "What happened to your previous wife?" she asked. Silas's entire body went rigid, his knuckles whitening where they gripped his coffee cup. For a moment, Anna thought he wouldn't answer, that she had pushed too far into territory he kept fiercely guarded. "Sarah died in childbirth," he said finally, each word emerging like it was torn from his throat. "Along with our daughter." The simple statement carried the weight of unbearable grief. Anna felt her heart clench in sympathy, recognizing the particular agony of losing both wife and child in a single devastating blow. No wonder this man had fled to the mountains, seeking a place where such pain couldn't follow. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been—" "It was 3 years ago." Silas cut off her sympathy with sharp efficiency. "I mention it only so you understand the risks involved in what I'm asking of you. This mountain is no place for difficult births or delicate constitutions." Anna heard the warning beneath his words, but also something else, a desperate hope that this time might be different, that she might succeed where his beloved Sarah had failed. The weight of such expectations felt almost crushing. "Where did this happen?" she asked. "Here? No. In Denver, where we lived then." Silas's voice remained carefully controlled, but Anna caught the tremor of old pain. "I was a different man in those days. Had a house in town, worked as a surveyor for the territorial government. Thought civilization was something worth participating in." "What changed your mind?" Silas stood abruptly, moving to the window where he stood staring out at the snow-covered clearing. "When Sarah died, the town doctor said it was God's will. The minister said she was in a better place. My neighbors said time would heal the wound." His shoulders tensed with remembered anger. None of them understood that some wounds don't heal. Some losses change you so completely that the person you were before simply ceases to exist. Anna watched this proud, solitary man struggle with emotions he clearly preferred to keep buried. She understood his flight to the wilderness, the need to find a place where grief could exist without judgment or well-meaning platitudes. "So he came here to hide," she said. Silas turned from the window, his pale eyes flashing with something dangerous. "I came here to survive. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've been running from life instead of living it." The silence that followed her words was electric with tension. Anna realized she had overstepped, pushed too hard against defenses this man had spent years building. But instead of the anger she expected, she saw something else in his expression, a grudging respect for her courage in speaking truth he didn't want to hear. "Perhaps you're right," he said finally. "Perhaps I have been hiding. But hiding requires someone who cares enough to seek you out." His gaze moved deliberately over her face, taking in her own worn appearance and haunted eyes. "Tell me, Mrs. Morrison, what are you running from?" The question hit Anna like a physical blow, forcing her to confront truths she had been avoiding since Thomas's death. She wasn't just a victim of circumstances, as she had told herself. She had made choices too, choices that led to isolation and vulnerability. "I ran from the truth about my husband," she admitted quietly. "I knew he was gambling, knew we were losing money we couldn't afford to lose. But I chose to pretend everything was fine, rather than face the problem directly. And now I'm here, asking you to save me from the consequences of that cowardice." Anna met his eyes directly, forcing herself to be as honest as he had been. "So perhaps we're both running from something, Mr. McGraw. The question is whether we can stop running long enough to build something real together." Silas returned to the table, settling into his chair with the deliberate movements of a man making a significant decision. He reached across the space between them and took her hand in his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against her skin. "I can't promise you love, Anna," he said, using her given name for the first time. "I'm not sure I'm capable of that anymore, but I can promise you honesty, protection, and a life that has meaning, even if it's hard." Anna looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, scarred from years of hard work and wilderness survival, but steady and warm. She thought of the alternatives awaiting her, death in the wilderness, or a return to civilization. As a marked woman, forever branded by her husband's debts and her own failures. "And I can promise you loyalty and my best efforts to give you the family you need," she said, "even if I can't promise love either." Silas nodded slowly, his thumb tracing over her knuckles in a gesture that was almost tender. "Then we have the foundation for an honest partnership, at least." "When?" Anna asked, surprised by her own practical acceptance of their arrangement. "Today, if you're willing. There's a minister in Pine Creek, about 6 hours' ride down the mountain. We can be married and back before nightfall." Anna felt a flutter of panic at the speed of it all, but forced herself to think practically. Delay would only give her time to lose her nerve, and winter was approaching fast. If she was going to commit to this life, better to do it quickly and completely. "Very well," she said. "Today." Silas squeezed her hand once, then released it. "I'll ready the horses while you prepare whatever you need to bring." As Anna watched this stranger, who would soon be her husband, move with purposeful efficiency around the cabin, she touched the bear claw necklace briefly when he passed close to her. The claws were warm from his body heat, worn smooth by constant handling, and she sensed they held deep significance. Perhaps a connection to the wild nature he had embraced, or a reminder of some crucial moment in his past. Whatever meaning they held, they were clearly important to the man she was about to marry. And if she was to share his life, she would need to understand all the pieces of his complex, guarded heart, including whatever painful memories had driven him to seek solace in the wilderness, and the desperate hope for family that had brought her to his door. Outside, the wind was picking up, bringing with it the promise of the first real snowstorm of the season. Time was running short in more ways than one. The ride to Pine Creek proved more treacherous than Silas had anticipated. What began as light snow flurries quickly intensified into a proper mountain storm, with winds that cut through their heavy coats and visibility that dropped to mere yards ahead of their horses. Anna clung to the saddle horn with numb fingers, grateful for Silas's decision to put her on his gentlest mare. The animals seemed to sense the urgency of their mission, picking her way carefully over the icy trail, despite the increasingly difficult conditions. Ahead of her, Silas rode with the easy confidence of a man who knew these mountains intimately, but even he had grown tense as the weather worsened. "How much farther?" Anna called out, her words nearly lost in the howling wind. 2 hours, maybe 3 in this weather," Silas replied, turning in his saddle to check on her. Snow had accumulated on his shoulders and in his beard, making him look like some ancient mountain spirit. "We can turn back if you prefer. The minister occasionally travels up to the settlements. We could wait for his next circuit." "When would that be?" "Spring, most likely." Anna considered their options. Spending the winter unmarried in Silas's cabin would create an impossible situation, too intimate for strangers, too uncertain for real partners. Better to formalize their arrangement now, regardless of the weather's challenges. "We continue," she decided. Silas nodded approvingly and urged his horse forward. As they descended the mountain trail, Anna found herself studying this man she had agreed to marry. Even in the harsh conditions, he moved with unconscious grace, reading the terrain with senses honed by years of solitary wilderness life. There was something almost musical in the way he guided his horse, a rhythm that spoke of deep familiarity with the mountain's moods and dangers. When they finally reached Pine Creek, the small settlement looked like a collection of toy buildings half buried in snow. Smoke rose from several chimneys, promising warmth and human company after hours of battling the elements. Silas led them directly to a modest log building with a cross mounted above the door. The Reverend Samuel Heirs proved to be a practical man in his 60s, weathered by years of frontier ministry and unsurprised by the unusual circumstances that brought couples to his door. He asked no probing questions about their brief courtship or the storm that had driven them to seek immediate marriage. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said simply, opening his Bible to the appropriate passages. "If you're both willing, participants in this union, that's sufficient for me." The ceremony was brief and utilitarian, witnessed by the minister's wife and a trapper who happened to be waiting out the storm. Anna stood beside Silas, acutely aware of his solid presence, while the familiar words washed over her in a strange echo of her first wedding. But where Thomas had been nervous and fidgeting, Silas remained steady and calm, his responses delivered in a clear, firm voice that suggested absolute commitment to the vows he spoke. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Silas turned to Anna with something approaching gentleness in his pale eyes. His kiss was brief and chaste, but warm enough to send unexpected heat through her cold, stiffened body. "Mrs. McGraw," he said softly, the name carrying weight and finality. "Mr. McGraw," she replied, testing the feel of her new identity. The return journey proved even more difficult than their descent. The storm had intensified, turning the trail into a treacherous maze of ice and hidden obstacles. Anna lost all feeling in her feet, despite the heavy boots Silas had insisted she wear, and her hands grew so numb she feared losing her grip on the reins. But Silas proved an attentive guardian, stopping frequently to check on her condition and sharing his own body heat when they paused for rest. During one particularly difficult passage, he dismounted and led both horses on foot, his sure knowledge of the trail the only thing standing between them and a potentially fatal wrong turn. "How do you do it?" Anna asked during one brief rest. Huddled against a large pine tree that provided minimal shelter from the wind. "How do you know where we are in all this?" Silas pointed to a series of scratches on the tree bark, barely visible beneath the accumulating snow. "Trail markers. I've carved them over the years, learning every path and shortcut the mountain offers." He brushed snow away from another marking higher up the trunk. "This one tells me we're 3 miles from home, with 2 creek crossings ahead." Anna studied the simple marks, recognizing the practical intelligence behind this system. "You've thought of everything." "Survival requires preparation," Silas replied, but there was pride in his voice at her recognition of his skills. "The mountain teaches you to think ahead or it kills you." As they continued climbing toward home, Anna found herself reflecting on the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she had been Anna Morrison, a widow facing an impossible choice. Now she was Anna McGraw, married to a man she barely knew, committed to building a life in one of the most isolated places she could imagine. Yet despite the uncertainty and the harsh conditions, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them as part of a partnership rather than alone. There was strength in that knowledge, even if love remained absent from their practical arrangement. The cabin appeared through the swirling snow like a beacon of warmth and safety. Silas helped Anna from her horse with careful attention to her exhausted state, then efficiently tended to both animals while she stumbled toward the welcoming glow of windows. Inside, the fire had burned low, but not out, and the cabin felt like paradise after hours in the brutal cold. Anna collapsed into a chair near the hearth, too tired to remove her snow-crusted coat or ice-stiffened boots. Silas entered moments later, bringing with him a swirl of cold air and snow. He moved immediately to build up the fire, then disappeared into what Anna assumed was his bedroom, returning with an armload of dry clothes and blankets. "You need to get out of those wet things before you catch pneumonia," he said practically. "I'll turn my back." Anna struggled with frozen fingers to unfasten her coat, her movements clumsy from cold and exhaustion. When she made a frustrated sound at her inability to manage the simple task, Silas stepped forward without hesitation. "Allow me," he said quietly. His hands were steady and impersonal as he helped her out of the sodden coat and boots. But Anna was acutely aware of their new relationship status. This man was now her husband, with all the rights and expectations that entailed, yet he treated her with the same careful consideration he might show to an injured stranger, asking no more intimacy than the practical situation required. When she was wrapped in dry blankets near the rebuilt fire, Silas disappeared again, returning with something that made Anna's breath catch in surprise. It was a wooden flute, carved from what appeared to be maple and polished to a warm glow. The instrument showed signs of regular use, worn smooth in places where fingers had caressed the wood countless times. "I thought you might like some music while you warm up," Silas said, settling into the chair across from her. "The storm will likely last through the night, and silence can be oppressive when you're not used to it." He raised the flute to his lips and began to play, the melody emerging soft and haunting in the firelit cabin. Anna recognized the tune as an old folk song about traveling far from home, but Silas's interpretation gave it new depth and melancholy. His fingers moved with practiced skill over the instrument, and his eyes took on a distant expression that suggested the music transported him to other times and places. The contrast between this gentle artistry and the rough mountain man she had first encountered was startling. Here was evidence of education, sensitivity, perhaps even formal musical training. What other depths lay hidden beneath Silas McGraw's practical exterior? When the song ended, Anna found herself studying her new husband with fresh curiosity. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My mother taught me," Silas replied, lowering the flute to his lap. She believed music was essential to a civilized life, even on the frontier. She was right, that was beautiful. Something flickered across Silas's expression. Pleasure at the compliment, perhaps, or memories of the woman who had shaped his early life. "Sarah used to say the same thing," he said quietly. The mention of his deceased wife created a moment of awkward silence. Anna realized she would be living with Sarah's ghost in more ways than one, competing with the memory of a love that death had preserved in perfect form. "I don't expect to replace her," Anna said carefully. "I understand that what we have is different." Silas met her eyes across the space between their chairs, something unreadable in his expression. "Different, yes, but that doesn't mean it can't be worthwhile in its own way." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside, they sat in companionable quiet, the fire crackling between them and the soft sound of wind in the eaves. Anna felt some of the tension leaving her shoulders as warmth, finally, penetrated her chilled body. "Tomorrow I'll begin teaching you what you need to know about mountain life," Silas said eventually. "Cooking on a wood stove, preserving food, reading weather signs, basic skills for surviving up here. And in return, you make this place a home instead of just a shelter." Silas's pale eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. "I'd forgotten how quiet it gets when there's no one to talk to." Anna understood the deeper meaning behind his practical words. This arrangement wasn't just about children and legacy. It was about two people finding a way to be less alone in an indifferent world. Perhaps that was foundation enough for something real to grow, given time and patience. The wooden flute in Silas's hands caught the firelight, its polished surface gleaming warmly. Anna wondered what other surprises this complex man held. What other glimpses of his hidden depths awaited her discovery in the long winter ahead. Anna woke on her first morning as Mrs. McGraw to find the cabin empty and a fresh pot of coffee waiting on the stove. Through the frost-covered windows, she could see Silas splitting wood in the clearing, his axe rising and falling with mechanical precision. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by deep snow that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. She dressed quickly and began exploring the cabin more thoroughly than circumstances had previously allowed. What she discovered surprised her. This was not the crude bachelor dwelling she had expected, but a carefully organized home designed for both comfort and efficiency. The kitchen area contained a collection of well-maintained cast-iron pots, a full set of dishes, and shelves lined with preserves, dried herbs, and staple goods. Someone had taken time to stock this place for a long winter, planning ahead with the thoroughness of a military campaign. In a trunk beneath the window, Anna found something that made her pause. Fabric. Bolts of cotton, wool, and even a small amount of silk, along with sewing supplies and patterns. Either Silas had been very confident about her acceptance of his proposal, or these materials had belonged to Sarah, kept as another memorial to his lost wife. Anna lifted a piece of blue cotton, holding it to the light from the window. The color would suit her complexion, and the quality was better than anything she had owned, even in her prosperous days with Thomas. The discovery raised questions about Silas's financial resources. This isolation clearly didn't stem from poverty. Finding everything you need, Anna turned to find Silas standing in the doorway, snow still clinging to his boots and beard. His pale eyes moved from the fabric in her hands to the open trunk, but his expression revealed nothing. "I was just looking around," Anna said, feeling oddly guilty for her exploration. "I hope you don't mind. This is your home now. You have every right to know what's in it." Silas hung his coat on a peg by the door and moved to warm his hands by the fire. "That fabric has been waiting for someone who could make use of it. It's beautiful quality. Where did it come from?" "Denver. I make trips down twice a year for supplies." He glanced at her worn traveling dress, taking in its shabby condition without comment. "You'll need warmer clothes for winter up here. Practical things that will stand up to mountain life." Anna nodded, already envisioning the garments she could create from the materials available. Sewing had been one of her few genuine skills during her marriage to Thomas, a talent she had developed out of necessity when money grew tight. "I'll make a list of what I need," she said. "Thread, buttons, perhaps some heavier wool." "Make whatever list you like," Silas interrupted. "But first, you need to learn the basics of staying alive up here." The next several hours proved educational, in ways Anna hadn't anticipated. Silas proved to be a patient but exacting teacher, showing her how to read the subtle signs that warned of changing weather, how to identify edible plants even under snow, and how to preserve food for the lean. Months ahead, "The mountain gives generously to those who know how to ask," he explained, pointing out a cluster of rose hips visible beneath their snowy covering. "But it's unforgiving to those who take its gifts for granted." Anna found herself oddly fascinated by this practical knowledge, so different from the social skills that had defined her previous life. There was something deeply satisfying about learning to read nature's signals, to understand the rhythms that governed survival in this harsh but beautiful place. As they worked together, preparing the evening meal, venison stew with vegetables, from Silas's root cellar, Anna began keeping a mental journal of observations about her new husband. He moved with economic grace, wasting no motion or energy. His hands were always busy, whether sharpening tools, mending equipment, or maintaining the 1,000 small systems that kept their isolated home functioning. "You seem to have thought of everything," she commented, watching him adjust the dampers on the stove with practiced ease. "Preparation prevents disasters," Silas replied. "Up here, a small oversight can become a fatal mistake." "Is that military thinking?" Silas paused in his adjustments, his expression growing guarded. "Among other things." Anna sensed another conversational door closing, but she was beginning to understand the pattern of Silas's communication. He revealed information in measured doses, like a man accustomed to keeping his own counsel and suspicious of those who asked too many questions. After supper, as they sat by the fire with cups of coffee, Anna decided to test the boundaries of their new partnership. "May I ask you something personal?" Silas looked up from the piece of leather he was working, a harness strap that had cracked during their wedding day journey. "You may ask. I may or may not answer." "Fair enough." Anna chose her words carefully. "You clearly have education, skills, resources. You could live comfortably in town if you chose. What really drives you to stay isolated up here?" For a long moment, the only sounds in the cabin were the crackling fire and the soft scraping of Silas's knife against leather. Anna began to think he wouldn't answer, that she had pushed too hard against his privacy. "Have you ever been in a place where everyone knows your business?" he finally asked. "Where every conversation stops when you enter a room, where every glance carries judgment or pity or unwanted speculation?" Anna thought of her final weeks in Denver after Thomas's death, when creditors and gossips had made every public appearance an ordeal. "Yes, then you understand why some people choose to step outside society entirely." Silas held up the repaired strap to examine his work. "Up here, a man's worth is measured by what he can do, not by what he's lost, or what people think he should have done differently. And what did people think you should have done differently?" Silas's hand moved unconsciously to the bear claw necklace at his throat, his fingers working the familiar talismans while he considered his answer. "They thought I should have gotten over Sarah's death faster, should have accepted God's will and moved on with my life, should have found another wife and started over instead of carrying my grief like a badge of honor." Anna heard the bitter edge in his voice, the resentment of a man who had been judged for refusing to pretend his loss was acceptable or easily healed. "So you came here to grieve in peace. I came here to discover what remained of me after grief was finished with its work." Silas set the leather aside and looked directly at her. "What I found was a man who could survive alone, but who had no reason to continue surviving." The stark honesty of his admission struck Anna like a physical blow. She recognized the same despair that had haunted her own dark nights after Thomas's death, the terrible question of what purpose remained when everything familiar had been stripped away. "And now?" she asked quietly. "Now I have a reason again. Whether that's enough to build something worthwhile remains to be seen." Anna stared into the fire, processing the weight of responsibility his words placed on her shoulders. She wasn't just being asked to bear children and maintain a household. She was being asked to give this man's life meaning again, to justify his continued existence through her presence and whatever family they might create. "That's a heavy burden to place on someone you barely know," she said. "Yes, it is." Silas made no attempt to soften the truth. "Just as your survival depends on someone you barely know, we're both taking considerable risks." Anna pulled a shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of their mutual vulnerability. Outside, wind sighed through the pine trees, a sound that was becoming familiar rather than frightening. This place was beginning to feel less like exile and more like refuge. "I keep a journal," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the admission. "Always have, since I was a girl. Would you mind if I continued the practice here?" "Write whatever you like. Privacy is one luxury we both have plenty of up here." Anna smiled at the small permission, already planning what she would record about this strange new life. The discovery of Silas's musical abilities, the unexpected comfort of their practical partnership, the way he had looked when speaking of his lost wife, all of it deserved documentation, if only to prove to herself that this dramatic change in her circumstances was real. "There's writing paper in the desk by the window," Silas added. "Sarah used to write letters to her sister back east." Another ghost, another reminder that Anna was not the first woman to occupy this space. But perhaps that wasn't entirely negative. Sarah had been loved here, cherished and protected, even if ultimately lost. The cabin still held echoes of that devotion, a warmth that went deeper than the heat from the fireplace. As they prepared for sleep, Silas retiring to his bedroom while Anna made do with blankets by the fire, Anna reflected on the unexpected developments of their first full day as husband and wife. Silas had shown her kindness without intimacy, teaching without condescension, honesty without cruelty. Perhaps their practical arrangement could indeed become something worthwhile, given time and patience. Perhaps two wounded people could find healing in mutual purpose, even if romantic love remained beyond their reach. The leather-bound journal she had hidden in her travel bag seemed to call to her from across the room. Tomorrow, she would begin recording this new chapter of her life, documenting whatever grew between Morrison McGraw and the complex, guarded man who had offered her sanctuary from an indifferent world. 3 weeks into their marriage, Anna discovered the silver locket quite by accident. While cleaning the main room, she had moved a stack of books from the mantelpiece and found the delicate piece of jewelry hidden behind them, as if someone had placed it there hastily and forgotten to retrieve it. The locket was exquisite, sterling silver, engraved with tiny roses and suspended from a chain so fine it seemed like spun moonlight. When Anna opened it with trembling fingers, she found herself staring at a photograph of a beautiful young woman holding an infant. Both subjects had the same pale eyes that characterized Silas, and the woman's smile held such radiant joy that Anna felt tears prick her own eyes. Sarah and her daughter, the family Silas had lost, preserved in silver and memory. Anna was still holding the locket when Silas returned from checking his trap lines, his arms full of rabbit and squirrel that would provide the next several days' meals. He stopped short when he saw what was in her hands, his entire body going rigid with an emotion Anna couldn't quite identify. "I was cleaning," she said quickly, feeling like an intruder in his private grief. "I didn't mean to pry. It's all right." Silas set down his burden and moved to take the locket from her hands, his fingers gentle as he traced the engraved roses. "I had forgotten where I put it." Anna watched his face as he studied the photograph, seeing the way his expression softened with remembered tenderness. This was the face of a man who had loved completely, without reservation or protection, and had paid the ultimate price for such openness. "She was beautiful," Anna said softly. "They both were. Sarah was 19 when this was taken. The baby, Emma, was barely 3 months old." Silas's voice carried the careful control of a man discussing unbearable loss. "The photographer had to work quickly. Emma wouldn't stay still long enough for a proper portrait. She looks like you. Your eyes." Sarah used to say the same thing. Silas closed the locket with a soft click and slipped it into his pocket. She was convinced Emma would grow up to break hearts with those eyes. The past tense hung heavy between them, a reminder of dreams cut short and futures that would never unfold. Anna found herself wondering what it would be like to love someone so completely that their loss could drive you to exile yourself from the world. "How did it happen?" she asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I'm sorry. That's too personal." But Silas surprised her by answering, his voice taking on the distant quality that suggested he was speaking as much to himself as to her. "Sarah was small, like you. The doctor said everything was progressing normally, but labor went on for nearly 2 days. When Emma finally came, she was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, lungs strong enough to wake the dead." He paused, staring into the fire as if the flames held images from that terrible day. But Sarah wouldn't stop bleeding. The doctor tried everything he knew, but frontier medicine has its limitations. "She held Emma for maybe an hour before—" His voice broke slightly. "She made me promise to raise our daughter to be strong and independent. Said she didn't want Emma growing up thinking women were fragile creatures who couldn't handle life's challenges." Anna felt her heart clench at the cruel irony. Sarah had died giving life, proving both the fragility and incredible strength of womankind in a single tragic moment. And Emma lasted 3 days without her mother's milk. There were no wet nurses available, and she was too small to take cow's milk. Silas's hand moved unconsciously to his throat, where the bear claw necklace lay hidden beneath his shirt. and buried them together on a hill overlooking the city. Sarah always loved views of the mountains. Anna understood now why Silas had fled to the wilderness. The civilized world had taken everything he valued and left him with nothing but memories and unbearable pain. Up here, surrounded by the mountains Sarah had loved, he could grieve without interference or judgment. "I'm sorry," she said inadequately. "No one should have to endure such loss." "Life doesn't consult our preferences about what we can endure," Silas replied, but his tone held acceptance rather than bitterness. "The question becomes what you do with the enduring." Anna thought of her own losses, not as dramatic as his, but significant in their own way. The miscarriages during her marriage to Thomas, each one a small death that left her feeling more worthless and broken. The gradual dissolution of her marriage as disappointment replaced hope. The final betrayal of discovering that even her husband's love hadn't been enough to prevent his self-destruction. "I lost 3 babies," she said quietly, the words emerging without conscious decision, "during my first marriage." Thomas grew more distant with each loss, as if he blamed me for failing to give him the family he wanted. Silas looked at her with new understanding, recognizing a fellow traveler on the road of reproductive grief. "How far along?" "The latest was 5 months. I felt her moving, had chosen names, started sewing baby clothes." Anna wrapped her arms around herself, remembering the devastating silence where life had once quickened. "The doctor said sometimes these things just happen, that I shouldn't blame myself, but Thomas seemed to think it was some failure of character on my part." Thomas was a fool. The simple declaration, delivered with absolute conviction, surprised Anna with its healing power. For years, she had carried the weight of those losses as personal failures, evidence of her inadequacy as a woman and wife. To hear someone else name Thomas's blame for what it was, cruel and unfair, lifted a burden she hadn't realized she was still carrying. "I used to wonder if God was punishing me for some sin I didn't even know I'd committed," Anna admitted, "or if I was just too weak to carry life successfully." "Childbirth is dangerous for every woman, regardless of her moral character or physical strength," Silas said firmly. "I've seen frontier wives tough as leather lose babies and delicate. City ladies deliver healthy children without difficulty. There's no logic to it, no justice. It's just one of the cruel realities of life." Anna felt tears threatening as years of self-recrimination began to dissolve under the gentle absolution in Silas's words. He understood her grief because he had walked through similar darkness, had questioned the same cruel randomness that governed life and death. "Do you think we're being foolish to try again?" she asked. "Given what we've both lost?" Silas considered the question with his characteristic thoroughness, staring into the fire as if seeking wisdom in the dancing flames. "Perhaps, but the alternative is to let fear make our decisions for us, and I've seen where that path leads." "Where does it lead?" "To a life so small and safe that it's hardly worth living." He met her eyes across the space between their chairs. "I spent 3 years hiding from the possibility of loss. It didn't make me happy, and it certainly didn't honor Sarah's memory. She would have wanted me to keep living, keep hoping, keep trying to build something meaningful." Anna thought of the woman in the locket photograph, radiating joy even in the face of mortality's uncertainties. Sarah McGraw had been willing to risk everything for the chance at family, at love, at the continuation of life beyond her own brief span. "She would have liked you," Silas said unexpectedly. "Sarah had strong opinions about character, and she would have respected your courage in making this choice." "You think this requires courage?" "I think choosing hope after experiencing loss is the most courageous thing any person can do." The conversation had grown heavy with emotion, but Anna found it oddly comforting to speak honestly about the grief they both carried. For the first time since arriving on the mountain, she felt truly seen by this man who had agreed to share his life with her. "Thank you," she said, "for understanding, for not thinking less of me because of my losses." "Loss doesn't diminish a person's worth," Silas replied. If anything, surviving it reveals the strength that was always there. As they prepared for sleep that night, Anna reflected on the day's revelations. The discovery of the locket had opened a door between them, allowing grief to be acknowledged and shared rather than borne in isolation. She understood now that her marriage to Silas wasn't just about practical necessity. It was about two wounded people finding the courage to hope again, despite the very real possibility that hope might once more be crushed. In her journal that evening, Anna wrote about the silver locket and its precious contents, about Sarah's radiant smile and baby Emma's perfect features. But mostly she wrote about the man who carried their memory with such tender devotion, and how his willingness to risk such loss again had given her permission to risk it as well. Outside their cabin, winter deepened its grip on the mountain. But inside, something warmer than fire had begun to grow between two people who had learned that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in avoiding pain, but in remaining open to the possibility of joy. Despite it, the silver locket, safely returned to its place among Silas's most precious possessions, held not just images of the past, but promises for whatever future they might build together. Carefully, hopefully, and with full acknowledgement of both life's fragility and its infinite capacity for renewal. The hand-forged knife arrived on Anna's breakfast plate one morning in late November, its blade gleaming in the early light that streamed through the cabin's windows. She stared at the weapon in confusion, then looked across the table at Silas, who was calmly eating his eggs, as if presenting his wife with a deadly implement was perfectly normal behavior. "I don't understand," Anna said, touching the knife's handle with tentative fingers. The leather grip had been carefully wrapped and fitted to a smaller hand than Silas's own, clearly crafted with her specifically in mind. "Winter is the most dangerous time on the mountain," Silas explained, between bites of bacon. "Not just because of the cold or the storms, but because that's when the predators grow desperate. A woman alone needs to be able to defend herself." Anna lifted the knife, surprised by its perfect balance and the comfortable way it settled in her grip. The blade was perhaps 6 inches long, sharp enough to shave the hair from her arm, and the steel held a blue-gray shimmer that spoke of expert craftsmanship. "You made this for me?" "Started working on it the day after we married." Silas pushed back from the table and moved to clear their dishes. "A weapon is only as good as the person wielding it, though, which means you need to learn how to use it properly." The next hour proved both educational and terrifying. Silas led Anna outside into the snow-covered clearing, where he had set up a series of targets made from scraps of wood and leather. Under his patient instruction, she learned to hold the knife properly, to thrust and slice with maximum efficiency, to keep her balance while defending against an imaginary attacker. "The blade is not a club," Silas corrected, when Anna's technique grew clumsy. "It's a precision instrument. Let the steel do the work, not your arm strength." Anna tried again, this time focusing on the smooth extension of her arm rather than the violent chopping motion that felt more natural. The knife sliced cleanly through the leather target, and she felt a surge of satisfaction at the clean cut. "Better! Now again. But this time imagine something is trying to kill you." The word sent a chill down Anna's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "What exactly might try to kill me up here?" Silas paused in his demonstration to consider the question seriously. "Bears, if you surprise them or threaten their cubs. Mountain lions, especially old ones that can't hunt their normal prey. Wolves, though they usually avoid humans unless they're rabid or starving." He met her eyes directly. "And men, if the wrong kind, find their way up here." "What kind of men?" "The kind who think a woman alone is fair game for whatever they have in mind." Anna felt her blood run cold at the implications. She had been so focused on the challenges of weather and isolation that she hadn't considered human threats. But of course they existed, even in this remote place. Perhaps especially in this remote place where law was whatever a man could enforce with his own strength. "Has that happened before?" she asked. "Not here," specifically, but I've heard stories from other settlements, and I've seen enough of the world to know that some men view the frontier as a place where civilized rules don't apply. Silas resumed his demonstration, showing her how to grip the knife for maximum control. I don't want to frighten you, but I'd rather you be prepared than vulnerable. Anna nodded, forcing herself to focus on the lesson despite her growing unease. The knife felt more substantial in her hand now, less like a tool and more like a lifeline. Under Silas's guidance, she practiced the basic moves until they began to feel natural: thrust, withdraw, slash, block. The most important thing to remember, Silas said, as they concluded the morning's training, is that hesitation can be fatal. If you find yourself in a situation where the knife is necessary, you can't afford to think about the morality of violence or worry about hurting someone who's trying to hurt you. I understand, Anna said, though she wondered if she truly could use the weapon when faced with a real threat. It was one thing to practice on leather targets, quite another to contemplate driving steel into human flesh. As if reading her thoughts, Silas stepped closer, his pale eyes intense with the need to make her understand. Promise me something, Anna. If the time ever comes when you need to use that knife, you won't hesitate. Your life is worth more than whatever mercy you might feel for someone threatening it. The use of her given name, still rare enough to catch her attention, underscored the seriousness of his words. Anna met his gaze squarely, recognizing the depth of his concern for her safety. I promise, she said, meaning it. That afternoon, while Silas worked on repairs to the cabin's roof, Anna found herself practicing with the knife in private, working through the movements he had taught her until they became second nature. The weight of the weapon at her belt, he had also crafted a sheath that allowed her to wear it concealed beneath her skirt, served as a constant reminder that her new life required different strengths than her previous existence. As the days had passed, Anna began to notice other changes in herself beyond the growing confidence with her knife. Her body was growing stronger from the physical demands of mountain life, her hands more calloused but also more capable. She could now split kindling with an axe, haul water from the creek without stopping to rest, and read the subtle signs that warned of changing weather. More importantly, she was beginning to understand Silas himself with greater clarity. Beneath his practical exterior lay deep wells of concern for her well-being, expressed not through words but through actions like the knife at her belt and the patient hours he spent teaching her survival skills. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Anna decided to test the growing intimacy between them. "May I ask you about the bear claws?" she said, nodding toward the necklace that was rarely absent from his throat. Silas's hand moved instinctively to the talismans, his fingers working their familiar surface, while he considered whether to answer. "What do you want to know? Where they came from? What they mean to you?" For a long moment, Anna thought he would deflect the question, as he had so many others. But then his expression grew distant, and she recognized the look of a man reaching back into memory. "I killed the bear 3 days after I arrived on this mountain," he said quietly. "It was an old male, probably 8 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs. I was making camp in what I thought was an empty clearing when it decided I was trespassing on its territory." Anna imagined the scene. A grief-stricken man alone in the wilderness, facing death in the form of an enraged predator. "How did you survive?" "Military training and pure luck. The bear was old and slow, and I had enough ammunition to bring it down before it could reach me." Silas's fingers continued to worry the claws, smooth from years of handling. "But it was a close thing. Close enough to make me realize that if I was going to live up here, I needed to respect the mountain's rules instead of imposing my own. And the necklace, a reminder that survival isn't about conquering nature, it's about finding your place within it." He met her eyes across the fire. "The bear died because it saw me as a threat to its territory. I wear its claws to remember that everything up here, including us, is both predator and prey, depending on the circumstances. Anna studied the man across from her, seeing new layers in his choice to live as he did. Silas hadn't just fled to the mountains to escape civilization. He had embraced a completely different way of understanding his relationship with the world around him. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The civilized world? I miss some things," Silas admitted. "Books, mostly, conversation with educated people. The luxury of not having to think about survival every moment of every day, but not enough to go back. No, not enough to go back." He leaned forward to add another log to the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on his weathered face. "What about you? Do you miss your old life?" Anna considered the question honestly, thinking of her former existence with its social obligations and material comforts. "I miss feeling safe," she said finally. "Not physically safe. I actually feel more secure here than I did in Denver toward the end, but emotionally safe, knowing what was expected of me, understanding my place in the world. And now I feel like I'm becoming someone completely different, stronger in some ways, but also more vulnerable." Anna touched the knife at her belt, drawing comfort from its solid presence. "I'm not sure yet if that's a good thing or a frightening thing. Perhaps it's both," Silas suggested. "The best changes usually are." As they prepared for sleep that night, Anna reflected on the day's lessons, both the practical instruction with the knife and the deeper insights into Silas's character. The man who had given her a weapon and taught her to use it was also the man who wore bear claws to remember his place in nature's hierarchy, who had found peace not in conquering the wilderness, but in learning to live within its rules. The hand-forged knife rested in its sheath beside her makeshift bed, a symbol of trust and protection that spoke louder than words about the bond growing between them. Whatever dangers lay ahead in their isolated existence, Anna knew she would face them armed not just with steel, but with the knowledge that someone cared enough about her survival to prepare her for whatever challenges the mountain might offer. The legal documents arrived with the December snowstorm, carried by a half-frozen messenger who had clearly struggled to reach their remote cabin. Anna was tending the fire when the knock came at their door, so unexpected after months of isolation that she froze with the poker in her hand, staring at Silas in alarm. "Stay back," he instructed quietly, his hand moving to the rifle mounted above the mantelpiece. But when he opened the door, they found not a threat, but a young man barely out of his teens, his lips blue with cold, and his horse standing exhausted in the swirling snow. "Message for Mrs. Anna Morrison McGraw," the messenger gasped, pulling a leather portfolio from beneath his coat with numb fingers. "From the law offices of Whitman, Burke and Associates in Boston." Anna felt the blood drain from her face. Boston, the city she had fled from what felt like a lifetime ago, abandoning a future that had terrified her more than poverty or even in death itself. Silas took the portfolio and helped the messenger inside, immediately setting about getting the boy warmed and fed, while Anna stared at the official-looking documents as if they were a coiled serpent ready to strike. She had known this moment might come eventually, but after months of mountain life, her old existence had begun to feel like something that had happened to someone else entirely. "Mom," the messenger, now seated by the fire with a cup of hot coffee, looked at her expectantly. "I need a signature confirming delivery." Anna signed with a hand that trembled only slightly, watching as the young man carefully tucked the receipt into his coat pocket. After Silas provided him with food and directions to the nearest shelter, the messenger departed back into the storm, leaving Anna alone with her husband and the documents that threatened to upend everything they had built together. "Are you going to open them?" Silas asked, when she continued to stare at the portfolio without moving. Anna broke the wax seal with fingers that felt disconnected from her body, spreading the papers across the kitchen table where she could read them in the lamplight. What she found there made her sink into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "Anna?" Silas moved to her side, concern evident in his voice. "What is it?" "My father is dead," she whispered, the words feeling strange on her tongue. And apparently, so is Anna Morrison. The documents told a story that was both simpler and more complex than the version Anna had lived through. According to the papers from Whitman, Burke and Associates, Miss Anna Catherine Worthington, daughter of railroad magnate Charles Worthington, had disappeared from Boston 3 years ago on the eve of her engagement to tobacco heir Jonathan Blackwood. Miss Worthington was believed to have been kidnapped or murdered, Anna read aloud, her voice growing stronger as she processed the implications. Extensive searches were conducted, but no trace of the missing heiress was ever found. Silas settled into the chair across from her, his pale eyes never leaving her face. But Anna Morrison did exist. Oh yes, Anna laughed, the sound holding no humor. Anna Morrison was my lady's maid, a sweet girl from Ireland who had dreams of traveling west and finding adventure. Anna looked up from the documents, meeting Silas's intense gaze. She also had no family, no connections, and a face that looked remarkably similar to mine when we dressed alike and wore our hair the same way. You traded places. I gave her my identity, my dowry, and my intended husband. In return, she gave me her name and her anonymity. Anna touched the papers with one finger, as if they might burn her. I thought it was the perfect escape. Anna Morrison could disappear into the frontier and never be found, while Anna Worthington would live quietly as the wife of a tobacco merchant. What went wrong? Anna closed her eyes, remembering the desperate courage that had driven her to such an extreme deception. Jonathan Blackwood is a monster. Wealthy, handsome, socially prominent, and utterly without conscience when it comes to women. I had heard whispers about his first wife, how she had died under mysterious circumstances after less than 2 years of marriage. Silas's expression grew thunderous. And your father wanted you to marry this man anyway? My father saw only the business advantages of the alliance. Railroads and tobacco, a fortune that would dominate the eastern seaboard. Anna's voice turned bitter. What was one daughter's happiness compared to such opportunities? So you fled rather than confront him. I tried confronting him first, begged, pleaded, presented evidence of Blackwood's character that should have horrified any decent father. Anna stared into the fire, remembering the cold dismissal she had received. He told me that my fears were feminine hysteria and that marriage would cure me of such foolish notions. Silas was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of her deception. When he finally spoke, his voice held a dangerous edge that Anna had never heard before. So the gambling debts, the creditors, the men who brought you here, all fabricated by my father's agents. The real Thomas Morrison did exist, and he did have gambling debts, but I was never married to him. Anna forced herself to meet Silas's eyes, seeing her own reflection in their pale depths. I was his widow for exactly as long as it took my father to track down my assumed identity and arrange for my capture. Your capture? Yes. Jake Hewitt and Cyrus Black weren't debt collectors. They were bounty hunters hired to retrieve a missing heiress and return her to Boston for her long-delayed wedding. The silence that followed was deafening. Anna watched Silas's face, seeing the exact moment when the full implications of her deception hit him. Everything they had built together, their marriage, their growing intimacy, their shared dreams of family, was founded on lies. Your father is dead, Silas said finally, his voice carefully controlled. What does that change? Anna looked down at the legal documents spread across their table. Everything. According to these papers, Charles Worthington died of a heart attack 6 weeks ago. His will leaves his entire fortune to his only child, Miss Anna Catherine Worthington, should she ever be found alive. And if she's not found, then the money goes to Jonathan Blackwood, who has maintained his engagement to me all these years, waiting for my return. Anna's hands shook as she turned to the next page. Apparently, he's convinced my father's lawyers that I was kidnapped and held against my will, and that finding me is a matter of rescuing a traumatized victim rather than retrieving a runaway bride. Silas stood abruptly, moving to the window where he stared out at the storm-lashed clearing. "How much money are we talking about? $15 million. The sum felt impossible to speak aloud, plus controlling interests in 3 railroad-owned companies and a dozen subsidiary businesses. 15 million. Silas repeated the number as if testing its reality. That's more wealth than most people could spend in several lifetimes. Yes. And Blackwood gets it all if you remain missing. Yes. So he has every incentive to keep searching for you, especially now that the lawyers know you're alive and married." Silas turned from the window, his expression grim. "Those bounty hunters will have reported your location. How long before he sends men to retrieve his missing bride?" Anna felt fear clench in her stomach, cold and sharp as her husband's hand-forged knife. "The messenger said there had been inquiries in Denver about a woman matching my description, men asking questions, offering rewards for information. They're already on their way then, probably." Anna gathered the documents into a neat pile, her movements automatic, while her mind raced through possibilities. "I could run again, take a different name, disappear deeper into the frontier." No. Silas's voice cut through her planning with absolute finality. "Running didn't work the first time, and it won't work now, not with that kind of money at stake. Then what do you suggest?" Silas moved back to the table, his pale eyes intense with purpose. "We make a stand. Here on ground. We know with advantages we can control. Against professional bounty hunters. Against whatever force Blackwood can afford to send after $15 million. Anna shook her head. "That's suicide, Silas." "Maybe. But it's also the only choice that doesn't involve spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." He reached across the table to take her hands in his calloused fingers warm against her cold skin. "Besides, you're forgetting something important." "What's that?" "You're not Anna Worthington anymore. You're Anna McGraw, and you have a husband who knows how to fight." Anna stared at this man who had given her sanctuary, taught her survival skills, and shown her kindness without expecting love in return. The thought of putting him in danger because of her deception made her feel sick with guilt. "I never meant for any of this to touch you," she said quietly. "When I agreed to marry you, I thought Anna Worthington was dead and buried forever. But she's not dead. She's sitting across from me, trying to decide whether to trust her husband with her life or run away to protect him from her problems." Silas squeezed her hands gently. "Which is it going to be, Anna?" Anna looked around the cabin that had become home, at the man who had become her anchor in a world that seemed determined to destroy everything she tried to build. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, but inside the circle of Silas's protection, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the possibility of being truly safe. "I choose to trust you," she said. "God help us both." Silas nodded grimly and released her hands, already moving toward the gun cabinet where he kept his more serious weapons. "Then we'd better start preparing for war." The military medal caught. The firelight as Silas pinned it to the inside of his coat, the bronze surface worn smooth from decades of handling. Anna had never seen the decoration before. Like so many aspects of her husband's past, it had remained hidden until circumstances demanded its revelation. "Congressional Medal of Honor," Silas explained, noticing her curious stare. "Awarded for actions during the Battle of Antietam." Anna felt her breath catch. The Medal of Honor was the highest military decoration the country could bestow, reserved for acts of valor that went far beyond the call of duty. She was married to a war hero, and she had never known it. "What did you do?" she asked. "Led a charge against Confederate artillery positions that were decimating my regiment," Silas replied matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "Lost most of my men in the process, but we took the guns." The casual way he dismissed his heroism told Anna more about his character than any amount of boasting could have. This was a man who had looked death in the face and emerged victorious, who possessed tactical skills honed in the crucible of America's bloodiest conflict. "How many men did you command?" In that particular action, about 200. Over the course of the war, several thousand. Silas moved to the gun cabinet and began withdrawing weapons Anna had never seen before. Rifles, pistols, ammunition, and equipment that spoke of serious military preparation. I was breveted to colonel by the war's end, though I never held the permanent rank. Anna watched her husband transform before her eyes from mountain hermit to military tactician, his movements becoming crisp and purposeful as he laid out their defenses. The cabin suddenly looked different. Not a cozy home, but a fortress with carefully positioned windows that offered overlapping fields of fire and thick log walls that could withstand considerable punishment. You planned this, she realized. When you built this place, you were thinking about defense. Old habits, Silas confirmed, checking the action on a rifle with practiced ease. A soldier learns to think strategically about everything, especially where he chooses to live. Over the next 3 days, as the storm gradually abated, Silas transformed their isolated cabin into a military stronghold. Anna found herself drafted as his lieutenant, helping to establish supply caches, clear fields of fire, and prepare defensive positions that would give them maximum advantage against attacking forces. The approach from the valley is the most likely route, Silas explained, pointing to a hand-drawn map he had sketched of the surrounding terrain. The trail switchbacks here and here, creating natural choke points where we can control their advance. Anna studied the map, beginning to understand the tactical thinking behind their preparations. What about the northern approach? Possible, but unlikely in winter. The snow is too deep, and the terrain too difficult for men unfamiliar with the mountain. Silas traced possible routes with his finger. They'll come up the main trail because it's the path of least resistance. How many men do you think they'll send? Depends on how much Blackwood wants you back. Silas set the map aside and began cleaning a pistol with mechanical precision. If he's desperate enough, he might hire an entire mercenary company, but more likely he'll send a small professional team, maybe 6 to 8 men who specialize in this kind of work. Anna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. And you think we can fight off 6 professional killers? I think we can make them pay a price high enough to reconsider their employment, Silas replied grimly. Fear is a weapon too, Anna. Men will do a lot for money, but most of them won't die for it. As they worked together preparing their defenses, Anna found herself seeing Silas with completely new eyes. The gentle man who had taught her to carve and played melancholy tunes on his wooden flute was also a hardened warrior who understood violence with the same intimate knowledge most people reserved for their closest family members. Are you frightened? She asked during a brief rest from their preparations. Silas considered the question while he sharpened his knife, the same blade he had used to free her from the iron shackles that felt like a lifetime ago. Scared? No. Concerned? Absolutely. There's a difference between fear and tactical awareness. I'm terrified, Anna admitted. Good. Fear will keep you alert and alive. Just don't let it paralyze you when the time comes to act. On the 4th morning after the legal documents arrived, Silas spotted the first signs of approaching danger. Smoke from a campfire rose in the distance, too far down the mountain to be friendly visitors, but close enough to confirm their worst fears. How long do we have? Anna asked, watching through the window as Silas studied the distant smoke through a spyglass. 6 hours, maybe 8, if they're moving carefully. Silas lowered the glass and turned to face her, his expression grave but determined. This is your last chance to change your mind, Anna. I can get you out through the northern pass, help you disappear so completely that even Blackwood's money won't find you. Anna looked around the cabin that had become her sanctuary, at the man who had shown her what it meant to be valued for her strength rather than her compliance. The thought of running again, of spending the rest of her life hiding from her own identity, filled her with weary revulsion. No more running, she said firmly. Whatever happens, we face it together. Silas nodded approvingly and handed her the hand-forged knife he had made for her protection. Then we'd better get into position. The defensive plan Silas had developed was elegantly simple. They would allow their attackers to approach within range, then use the terrain and their superior knowledge of the area to pick off opponents from concealed positions. The cabin itself would serve as a final stronghold, its thick walls and carefully positioned firing ports turning it into an almost impregnable fortress. Anna took her assigned position in the loft, where a modified window gave her a clear field of fire down the main approach trail. Her hands shook as she checked her rifle, a weapon she had learned to use with growing proficiency over their months together, but her mind felt crystalline clear. "Remember what I taught you," Silas called softly from his position near the front door. "Breath control, smooth trigger pull, and don't shoot until you're certain of your target." Anna nodded, settling into the comfortable shooting position he had drilled into her through countless practice sessions. Below, she could see Silas moving with the fluid grace of a predator, checking each defensive position one final time before the killing began. The waiting was the hardest part. Anna found her mind wandering to the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. From pampered heiress to frontier wife to cornered fugitive preparing to fight for her life. The transformation felt surreal, like something from one of the adventure novels she had read as a sheltered girl in Boston. But the rifle in her hands was real enough, as was the sound of horses approaching through the forest. Anna pressed her eye to the rifle's sight, scanning the trail for movement, while her heart hammered against her ribs. "I count 7 riders," Silas whispered from below, his voice carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "Professional outfit by their equipment and spacing." Anna spotted them a moment later, dark figures moving carefully up the switchback trail, their horses picking each step with the caution of animals sensing danger. Even at this distance, she could see that these were not the crude bounty hunters who had first brought her to the mountain. These men moved with military precision, their weapons at ready and their formation designed to minimize vulnerability. "Anna," Silas called softly, "do you see the man in the lead? The one on the grey horse?" Anna adjusted her sight picture, focusing on the rider Silas had indicated. The man sat his saddle with obvious authority, his bearing suggesting leadership. Even at several hundred yards distance, he wore a long coat that looked expensive, even by city standards, and his horse was clearly superior breeding stock. "I see him. That's probably their leader, maybe even Blackwood himself, come to collect his prize personally." The thought that her tormentor might be within rifle range sent a surge of fierce satisfaction through Anna's body. After years of running from this man's influence, the possibility of ending the threat once and for all felt like divine justice. "Can you make the shot?" Silas asked. Anna studied the distance, the wind conditions, the angle of approach. It would be a difficult shot, but not impossible with the skills Silas had taught her. One bullet could end this entire nightmare, freeing her from a past that had pursued her across half a continent. "Yes," she said, "I think so." "Then wait for my signal. We want them closer before we reveal our positions." Anna kept her rifle trained on the lead rider while the party continued their careful ascent. As they drew nearer, she could make out individual faces, see the quality of their equipment and the professional wariness with which they approached the cabin. These were not men who could be easily discouraged. Whatever Blackwood was paying them, it was enough to motivate a level of dedication that spoke of serious money and serious consequences for failure. "Signal fire," Silas said suddenly, pointing toward a column of smoke rising from a peak to the north. "That's Jim Hadley's signal. He's seen something we need to know about." Anna glanced toward the distant smoke, recognizing the communication system Silas had established with the few other mountain dwellers in the region. Jim Hadley was a trapper who lived 15 miles away, close enough to serve as an early warning system, but far enough to avoid being caught in whatever violence erupted around the McGraw cabin. "What's he saying?" Silas studied the smoke pattern with practiced eyes, reading the message in the carefully timed puffs that rose into the grey winter sky. More riders coming from the south. At least a dozen, maybe more. Anna felt her stomach. A drop. 7 professional gunmen were already more than they could handle with any certainty of survival. A dozen more would turn their defensive position from difficult to hopeless. They're surrounding us, she realized. Looks that way. Silas's voice remained calm, but Anna could hear the tension beneath his controlled facade. Blackwood isn't taking any chances this time. Anna watched the approaching riders, recognizing the trap that was closing around them. The main party would continue up the obvious trail, drawing their attention and fire, while the larger force moved to cut off any escape routes and ensure that their quarry had nowhere to run. What do we do now? Silas was quiet for a long moment, his tactical mind working through options that were rapidly dwindling to nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice held the grim determination of a soldier who had faced impossible odds before. You changed the rules of engagement. What does that mean? It means we don't wait for them to surround us. Silas moved away from his position, gathering equipment with rapid efficiency. We're going to hit them before they're ready, disrupt their plan, and force them to react instead of executing a coordinated assault. Anna felt a surge of fear, mixed with admiration for her husband's tactical thinking. Even facing overwhelming odds, he was looking for ways to seize the initiative rather than simply reacting to their enemy's moves. How? Remember the emergency. Cache I showed you last week, the one hidden in the rocks above Dead Horse Creek. Anna nodded, recalling the supply depot Silas had established as a fallback position in case their cabin became untenable. We're going to circle around behind the southern party and hit them while they're still moving into position. If we can eliminate enough of them, we might convince the others that the job isn't worth the cost. The plan was audacious to the point of madness. 2 people attempting to ambush a dozen professional killers in terrain the enemy had not yet secured. But Anna recognized the desperate logic behind it. Better to die fighting on their own terms than to be trapped in the cabin like animals waiting for slaughter. When do we leave? Now, before they complete their encirclement. Silas shouldered. A pack loaded with ammunition and supplies. Stay close, move quietly, and if I fall, you head for the cache and keep running until you're clear of the mountain. Anna collected her own gear, including the hand-forged knife that had become both tool and talisman during their months together. As they prepared to leave the cabin that had been their sanctuary, she took one last look around the room, where she had discovered what it meant to be valued for her strength rather than her beauty or her fortune. Silas, she said as they reached the door. Yes? Whatever happens out there, I want you to know that these months with you have been the happiest of my life. Silas turned to look at her, his pale eyes holding an intensity that took her breath away. Anna, I know we married for practical reasons, she continued quickly. But somewhere along the way it became real for me. You became real for me. For a moment, Silas's carefully controlled facade cracked, revealing depths of emotion that he normally kept hidden. For me too, he said quietly. More real than I thought possible after Sarah. They kissed then, briefly but with desperate intensity, tasting the possibility that this might be their last moment of peace together. When they separated, both of their faces held the grim determination of people who had found something worth dying for. Ready? Silas asked. Anna checked her weapons one final time, feeling the weight of the knife at her belt and the rifle in her hands. Around them, the mountain waited in ominous silence, its snow-covered peaks witness to countless struggles between predator and prey. Ready, she said. Together, they slipped out into the wilderness, leaving behind the safety of their cabin for the deadly game of cat and mouse that would determine whether Anna McGraw would finally be free to live her chosen life, or whether the ghosts of Anna Worthington would drag her back into a gilded cage from which there would be no escape. The signal fire blazed to life on the ridge above Dead Horse Creek, just as the sun reached its zenith. sending a column of black smoke into the crystalline mountain air. Anna struck the flint with trembling fingers, coaxing sparks from tinder that Silas had prepared weeks ago as part of their emergency preparations. Far below, she could see the southern party of riders picking their way through the narrow canyon, unaware that their quarry had circled behind them. 12 men on horseback, armed with military precision and moving with the confidence of hunters who believed their prey was trapped and helpless. They had no idea that Anna and Silas McGraw were stalking them. Perfect timing, Silas whispered from his concealed position among the rocks. His rifle was trained on the lead rider, a bearded man whose expensive coat and superior horse marked him as the expedition's commander. The smoke will draw the main party away from the cabin, giving us a clear field of fire down here. Anna watched the signal fire consume the prepared kindling, its message clear to anyone who understood the mountain's communication systems. Jim Hadley would see it and respond with his own signal, creating the impression of a coordinated resistance that might make their enemies think twice about the forces they were facing. "Remember," Silas continued, his voice barely audible above, "the wind. We take the leaders first. Without command structure, the others will be easier to scatter." Anna nodded, settling into the shooting position he had taught her during countless practice sessions. Her rifle felt familiar in her hands, now an extension of her will rather than an unfamiliar tool. The months of mountain life had transformed her from a helpless victim into someone capable of defending what mattered to her. The riders below were close enough now that she could hear their voices carrying on the thin air. They spoke in low tones, professional and businesslike, as they discussed positions and timing. These were not cruel men taking pleasure in their hunt. They were simply businessmen conducting a lucrative transaction. That somehow made it easier. "On my count," Silas whispered. 3, 2. The first shots rang out almost simultaneously, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. Anna's target, a thin man on a sorrel mare, tumbled from his saddle with a cry of pain and surprise. Beside him, the bearded leader clutched his shoulder, but managed to stay mounted, wheeling his horse toward cover, while shouting commands to his scattered men. Chaos erupted in the canyon below. Horses reared and plunged as their riders fought for control, some dismounting to seek cover among the rocks, while others attempted to charge up the slope toward their attackers' positions. Anna worked the bolt action on her rifle with mechanical precision, just as Silas had taught her. Aim, fire, cycle the action, aim again. The movements felt natural now, muscle memory taking over while her conscious mind focused on target selection and breathing control. A bullet whined off the rocks beside her head, sending stone chips flying. The return fire was beginning to find their range, forcing Anna to duck lower behind her defensive position. Below, the surviving riders were recovering from their initial shock, using their superior numbers to lay down suppressing fire, while some of their companions attempted flanking maneuvers. "Time to move," Silas called, already gathering his equipment. "They'll have our position marked in another minute." Anna followed him deeper into the rocks, using the terrain to mask their movement while maintaining pressure on the enemy below. This was the deadly game of cat and mouse that Silas had warned her about. Position, fire, move, position again. The mountain itself became their ally, providing concealment and elevation advantages that their enemies couldn't match. But the professional killers were adapting quickly. Anna could hear their leader, wounded but still in command, directing his men with crisp military efficiency. They were spreading out, using covering fire and coordinated movement to reduce their vulnerability while closing the distance to their tormentors. "There!" one of them shouted, pointing toward a flash of movement among the rocks. 2 of them heading north toward the ridge. A fusillade of rifle fire peppered the slope above Anna and Silas, forcing them to scramble for deeper cover. The enemy had spotted their movement and was coordinating their response, bringing their superior numbers to bear in an attempt to pin down their elusive targets. Anna felt a bullet tug at her coat sleeve, close enough to feel the wind of its passage. Fear and adrenaline coursed through her veins, but underneath lay something else, a fierce satisfaction at fighting back after years of running from forces beyond her control. "Signal fires working," Silas observed, pointing toward the main trail where the other party of riders was visible in the distance, heading toward the false signal at a rapid pace. "We've split their forces," Anna counted the riders below. 8 still mounted, maybe 2 more on foot among the rocks. 4 eliminated from the original dozen, better odds than they had started with, but still heavily outweighed by professional killers who were growing more organized by the minute. "Can we break contact?" she asked, ducking as another volley of shots rang out. "Not yet. We need to thin their numbers more before they regroup." Silas indicated a narrow path that led higher up the canyon wall. "There's a better position up. There, overlooks the whole canyon and gives us multiple escape routes." Anna followed him up the treacherous path, her boots slipping on ice-covered stones while bullets whined overhead. Behind them, she could hear their pursuers organizing a pursuit, their leader's voice cutting through the mountain air with crisp commands. The hunt was far from over, but for the first time in years, Anna McGraw was no longer the prey. The marriage certificate lay crumpled in the snow at Anna's feet, hastily scribbled in Silas's determined handwriting when their defensive position had been overrun. Their enemies had finally cornered them on a narrow ledge above Dead Horse Creek, but not before the bearded leader had identified himself as Jonathan Blackwood himself, come personally to reclaim his missing bride, Anna Catherine Worthington. Blackwood called from his position among the rocks below, his voice carrying the cultured authority of old money and older cruelty. "You've led us quite a chase, my dear, but it's time to come home." Anna pressed herself against the stone wall behind her, Silas's body shielding her from the rifle fire that had driven them into this desperate corner. Blood seeped from a wound in his shoulder where a bullet had found its mark, but his grip on his weapon remained steady. "I am home," Anna called back, her voice stronger than she felt. "And my name is Anna McGraw." Blackwood's laughter echoed off the canyon walls, cold and mocking. "A mountain hermit's whore? Really, Anna, you can do so much better than that. $15 million buys a great deal of respectability. It also buys a great deal of violence." Apparently, Anna risked a glance over the rocks, seeing the scattered bodies of men who had died for Blackwood's obsession with possessing her. "How many people have you killed to satisfy your wounded pride?" "As many as necessary. You belong to me, Anna. You've always belonged to me, ever since your father promised you to me when you were 16 years old." The casual way he claimed ownership of her life sent rage coursing through Anna's veins. This man had spent years hunting her like an animal, had corrupted her father's memory, and destroyed countless lives in his pursuit of a woman who despised everything he represented. "I belong to myself," Anna declared, pulling the crumpled marriage certificate from the snow and holding it high enough for Blackwood to see. "And to my husband, legally married in the eyes of God and the territorial government. A marriage based on lies and deception? I think not." Blackwood's voice turned silky with false reasonableness. "Come down peacefully, Anna, and I'll see that your mountain man dies quickly. Continue this foolishness, and I'll make his suffering last for days." Silas shifted beside her, his pale eyes meeting hers with grim determination. "Don't listen to him," he whispered. "Men like that never keep their promises." Anna knew he was right. Blackwood would torture Silas regardless of what she did, would take perverse pleasure in making her watch while he destroyed the man who had dared to touch what Blackwood considered his property. "I have a counter-proposal," Anna called down to her tormentor. "Leave this mountain now, and I won't put a bullet through your black heart." More laughter, this time joined by the surviving members of Blackwood's expedition. They had Anna and Silas pinned down, with no apparent escape routes, time on their side and superior numbers to ensure victory. What they didn't have was knowledge of the mountain's hidden passages. "Now," Silas whispered, pointing toward a narrow crack in the rock wall that was barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. Anna squeezed through the opening first, feeling sharp stone tear at her clothes, while Silas provided covering fire to keep their enemies from advancing. The passage was so narrow she had to turn sideways to make progress, but it led to a hidden cave system that Silas had discovered during his early years on the mountain. Behind them, angry shouts indicated that Blackwood's men had discovered their escape route. But the passage was too narrow for more than one person at a time, turning their numerical advantage into a liability. "This way," Silas directed, leading her deeper into the cave system. Blood from his shoulder wound left a trail on the stone, but he moved with the sure knowledge of a man who had prepared for exactly this situation. The caves opened onto a ledge overlooking the main trail, where the second party of riders was, finally returning from their wild goose chase toward the signal fire. Anna could see confusion in their movements as they tried to understand what had happened to their companions and their quarry. "Perfect," Silas breathed, raising his rifle to his shoulder despite his wound. "They're bunched up in the perfect kill zone." Anna took position beside him, her own weapon trained on the riders below. These men had come to drag her back to a life of gilded captivity, to force her into the bed of a man who viewed her as property rather than a person. The shots rang out almost simultaneously, precise and devastating. 3 riders fell in the first volley, their horses rearing in panic, while the survivors scrambled for cover that didn't exist on the narrow trail. "Surrender!" Anna called down to them, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally embraced her own power. "Your employer is trapped in the caves. His money isn't worth your lives." The remaining mercenaries looked at each other uncertainly, recognizing the hopelessness of their position. Without Blackwood's direct authority, and faced with an enemy that seemed to have turned their own trap against them, they began to waver. "We're done!" one of them shouted, throwing down his weapon. "This job isn't worth dying for!" The others followed suit, their professional dedication crumbling in the face of superior tactics and impossible odds. These were men who fought for money, not principle, and money was worthless to dead men. "Your turn, Blackwood," Anna called, toward the cave entrance where her former tormentor remained trapped. "Come out and face the woman you've been hunting." The hand-carved cradle sat in the corner of the cabin's main room, its smooth maple surface glowing warmly in the light from the fireplace. Silas had begun working on it in January, when Anna's condition became obvious, spending the long winter evenings shaping each piece with the patient devotion of a man who had finally found his purpose. Spring had come early to the mountain that year, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings. Outside the cabin windows, wildflowers dotted the meadow where Silas had buried Jonathan Blackwood's body 6 months ago, after their final confrontation in the caves had ended with the tobacco heir's fatal fall into an underground chasm. Anna rocked gently in the chair beside the cradle, her hand resting on the firm swell of her belly, where their child grew strong and active. At 7 months, she felt like a ship in full sail, magnificent and unwieldy in equal measure. But unlike her previous pregnancies, this one felt different, solid and real in a way that filled her with quiet confidence rather than anxious fear. "The baby's moving again," she told Silas, who was cleaning his rifle by the fire. "I think he's going to be a fighter like his father. Or she's going to be stubborn like her mother," Silas replied, setting aside his weapon to move closer to Anna's chair. His shoulder had healed well from the bullet wound, leaving only a small scar to mark their victory over the forces that had pursued Anna across the continent. Anna took his hand and placed it on her belly, smiling as their child kicked against his palm with vigorous enthusiasm. Silas's face softened with wonder, the same expression of amazed joy that had appeared when they first felt the baby quickening in her womb. "Strong," he said approvingly. "This one's going to survive whatever the mountain throws at them." Anna leaned into her husband's embrace, marveling at how completely her life had transformed since that desperate day when she arrived in iron shackles. The frightened, helpless woman who had faced Silas's ultimatum seemed like a stranger now. Someone she had once been but could barely remember. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, "taking on a woman with so many complications?" Silas considered the question with his characteristic thoroughness, his pale eyes studying her face with the same careful attention he brought to everything important in their shared life. "I regret the violence that followed you here," he said. "Finally, I regret that good men died because of one man's obsession, but taking you as my wife, never." Anna's journal lay open on the table beside them, filled with months of entries documenting their extraordinary journey from strangers bound by necessity to partners united by choice. The leather binding was worn now from constant use, its pages a record of discoveries and growth that she hoped their child would someday read and understand. The entries from recent weeks told of preparing for parenthood with a mixture of anticipation and well-earned caution. Anna had experienced spotting in her 5th month that sent them both into a panic, but Dr. Harrison from Pine Creek had pronounced mother and baby healthy during his monthly visits to check on their progress. "Sarah would have liked you," Silas said unexpectedly, his hand still resting on Anna's belly. "She would have approved of your strength." Anna felt no jealousy at the mention of his first wife, only gratitude for the love that had taught Silas how to open his heart again despite devastating loss. Sarah's presence in their cabin had faded gradually, replaced not by Anna's domination, but by a new identity they had created together. "I think she would have been happy that you found love again," Anna replied. "Real love, not just practical partnership." "When did it become real for you?" Silas asked. Anna thought back through the months of their marriage, remembering specific moments when her feelings had shifted from gratitude to affection, to something deeper and more enduring. "The night you gave me the knife," she said. "When I realized you weren't just protecting your investment, but genuinely caring about my safety. That's when I began to see the man behind the mountain hermit facade. For me, it was earlier. The morning after we were married, when you didn't complain about the difficulties of our situation, but simply began figuring out how to make the best of them." Silas's thumb traced gentle circles on her belly. "You proved that day that you were a partner, not a burden." A knock at the door interrupted their reflection, followed by a familiar voice calling out in greeting. Jim Hadley appeared in the doorway, his weathered face split by a gap-toothed grin as he took in the domestic scene before him. "Brought the mail from town," the old trapper announced, producing a bundle of letters from his pack. "Looks like you got some official correspondence from back east." Anna accepted the letters with mild curiosity, recognizing the return address of the law firm that had handled her father's estate. The legal battles over her inheritance had been resolved months ago, with Anna's identity as the rightful heir firmly established, and Jonathan Blackwood's competing claims dismissed after his convenient disappearance. "What does it say?" Silas asked as Anna read through the formal language of legal correspondence. "The last of Blackwood's associates have been arrested," Anna reported, "charged with conspiracy and multiple counts of murder related to his search. For me, the courts have also approved my petition to donate the majority of father's fortune to establishing schools for frontier children." Anna had kept enough money to ensure their family security, but the bulk of Charles Worthington's railroad fortune would now serve purposes he never would have approved, educating the children of settlers and immigrants whom he had considered. Beneath his notice, "Good," Silas said with satisfaction. "Let something positive come from all that pain." As evening approached, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire settle into glowing embers while their unborn child moved restlessly in Anna's womb. Outside, the mountain settled into its nightly rhythms, the sounds of wind and wildlife creating a symphony of peace that had once seemed foreign and frightening to a city-bred woman. Anna opened her journal to a fresh page, preparing to record the events and emotions of another day in the life she had chosen over the gilded cage of her birth. At the top of the page, she wrote the date and then paused, considering how to capture the profound contentment that filled her heart. Finally, she began to write, "Today I felt our child kick with such strength that Silas laughed out loud with delight. In this moment, surrounded by the love I never thought possible and carrying the future we have created together, I am no longer the frightened woman who arrived here in chains. I am Anna McGraw, wife and mother-to-be, living freely in the place. I have chosen to call home. The hand-carved cradle waited in the corner, ready to hold the next generation of their mountain family. And in the growing darkness outside their cabin, the wilderness that had once seemed like exile now stood as guardian and sanctuary for the love that had bloomed in the harshest of circumstances, proving that even in the cruelest places, hope could take root and flourish beyond all expectation.